When's the last time you just sat down for 2 hours and you're like, I'm going to do nothing? And then wait for it. Think about that for a moment. I'm going to sit for 2 hours and do nothing. Maybe me, a pen, and a pad. Isn't there a bit of like terror that almost creeps in? Like, wait a second, hold on. I ain't signed up to be like that alone with myself. I don't really want to hear like my thoughts that loudly. And I think it's something that we're all missing. And I think what you just said, I think if people stopped and reflected more, instead of filling space more, they would actually find out more about themselves.
Joe.
Chris.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great being here with you. Thanks for the invite.
How did you get started ministering to people?
Yeah, that's a good story. So for me, that really started back when I was younger. I was actually a part of a church in the inner city of Chester, Pennsylvania. And for me, growing up in a space where there was a lot of poverty, a lot of need, just seeing my parents really rally around people and try to care for people through our church. And so I'm a little kid, and we're going, and I have all these core memories of just helping and caring for people. My dad would always say, he's like, God loved us, God loved people, so we want to love other people. And so whether that was, us piling into the minivan and taking a neighbor over to try to get them to a job interview so they could try to get a new opportunity, or whether that was across the street. We had a neighbor at one point, and she had a single mom, probably about 5 kids, and they would just go through different seasons where they just didn't quite have enough. And so I remember them coming over and being, hey, can we, you got anything for dinner? So us being able to yeah, here's some boxes of mac and cheese or some food. And so just kind of having growing up with we're thinking outside of just ourselves. Because of God's love for us, we want to love other people. And so just having that bigger vision than just what can we do for ourselves and what can we get for ourselves.
How much does observing a parent or family member having service as a part of their life, do you think influences a young person also wanting to have service in their life?
That's great. I think parents normalize certain things for their kids. They create certain culture and context that when you're young especially just becomes part of your DNA. It doesn't create your trajectory, but it does create a context that you're working out of. And so sometimes if it's a bad context, people react negatively to them and be like, oh, this is how my parents did things. That didn't feel good, so I want to kind of do the opposite. And in other contexts, it's like, okay, I saw the joy it brought other people. I saw the joy it brought my parents, and I saw the joy it even brought me as just a kid being able to participate and be a part of something bigger. And so for me, that really was kind of the catalyst for me moving into and having a heart for the church and for ministry. And I think for parents in general, the lessons that we're teaching our kids, more through our actions and even our words, is what's going to kind of shape the foundation that they're going to have as they move into adulthood.
Do you think that most children have a reaction response that's either my parents did that, so I'm going to do that, or my parents did that, so I'm not going to do that, and there's nothing really in between?
I mean, I think sometimes we run into false dichotomies, right? So I wouldn't want to say it's only one or only the other. I think often it is one or the other, though. Often people either see the value in how they were raised, and I think actually there's a more complexity than just that, because if we think about our experiences in growing up, there may be different ways that we're like, we really loved how our parents did this, and we might really want to bring that as a value as I become an adult and in the spaces that I go and the relationships I have. And even within that same parent group, you may also have that area, I kind of saw as I got older or as I experienced it, maybe that would have been a place that they could have grown or improved. And so I think we're kind of at the same time taking both sides. So on a particular issue, we might be like, oh, I want to be like my parents like that. And on another issue, we might be like, yeah, I want to grow. I want to shape things a little bit differently than they did.
I find it so interesting that you bring in the context of whatever experience the parents brought the kids along into, if it was a positive context or a negative context, regardless of what it actually was, that'll kind of be a tell on which way the kid goes in that false dichotomy.
Yeah.
What was it that inspired you to want to serve young people?
Well, I don't know. There's a piece of it that I always want to stay young. When we actually moved up to Philadelphia and helped to start a church up here, we actually initially moved in. I got my job before we got housing, and so we actually moved in with a young couple who had recently gotten married. And I distinctly remember sitting around their dining room table, and they're talking about our church had just got started, and they're talking about all the young people in the church. They're listing all the young people off. And at this point, we had just had our second child, my wife, Kristen, and I. And so we had two little kids. We had sold a house in Maryland to move up here. So we already owned a home. They were renting. And they're listing all the young people off. And they were like, hold on, like, what about us? And they looked at us with that look, and you're like, no, we're not young. And that was like when I first realized, like, oh, people aren't perceiving us as young. But I always just, when you're young, there's just so much that's being formed. There's so many questions that you're wrestling with. And I feel like even in today's age, like that's getting extended further, just as the average age of people getting married is later and later now. It's about 30, I think, for men and 28 for women. And so where those would have been early 20s, a few decades ago, now it's, late 20s, that there's just a lot more discovery that people are working through, and often working through kind of alone, and trying to discover themselves, trying to discover their purpose, trying to discover how and what does community look like for me, and what's my purpose. And so for me, being able to be alongside people in those big questions as they really wrestle with, why am I here? What's my purpose in life? Where am I going to find fulfillment in life? To be able to sit with people and have those conversations, it just brings me a lot of joy, because I think at the end of the day, there are answers to those questions.
What does young mean to you?
Well, I still like to categorize myself as young, but now with two kids that one's a teenager, I don't know if the term fully applies to me anymore. I'll always take it in part. I think these days, part of it is season of life, honestly. If you're in your early 20s or mid-20s and you have two kids, the season of life that you're in is different than even the person who is in their late 20s, who may not be, married, may not have kids yet. I think a lot of it's honestly season of life for the culture and society we're in right now.
Well, it's like a 55-year-old entering, a retirement community or an old folks home that sounds fairly young. You're fairly young,
yeah,
to be doing that, right? So
I feel like it's a little bit relative. Some people are still trying to figure out like where they're going in life, and some people, might feel like, I'm already accomplishing my goals in life. And I think in today's era where it's not just I go to college, I get a degree, I get a job in that degree, and now I'm just forever doing that one thing, and I'm working as an engineer at Boeing, and I'm working there for the rest of my life. With just the ability to move, the ability to move careers, the ability to work remotely, there's just so many more opportunities. I think part of young versus old is also like settling. So I think one of the great things about our current society is you can go and work right now, have a great career, and you can go travel the world. And that might be like what you value, and that might be what you're giving yourself to. But in one sense, there's things that when you start settling, there's just different friction that creates. And I think part of that starts putting you in more of a category of like, now you're more linear in your motion and less moving. Like scatter is not the right word, because there's a negative connotation to that. I'm trying to find a better word to describe that, but just having more freedom to kind of move from one thing to the other thing, which is, I think, one of the great things that is available that 2 generations ago they wouldn't have a category for. But I think it also does mean that often we can stay in younger seasons longer because the settling starts creating more of like a cementing. When you have multiple kids, you can't just pick up and move without now considering, Well, now I'm uprooting them from their school, from their friends. So there's a lot more spheres that you start getting rooted in the more settled you're in a place. And I think that's part of the difference is when you're that youthful zeal to be able to go out and I'm just going to explore this. And I didn't really like that job. So you know what? I quit. And now I'm going to wait for the next better opportunity. And when you have a bunch of responsibilities and you're really rooted in places, sometimes it starts to restrict your ability to be free like that. And so it does start, when a tree's taking roots in one place, it starts to grow larger, but also more established in a place. And so I think there's just different things in our culture and society now that are freedoms and challenges and that we have that 2 generations ago they wouldn't have had. Some people didn't even leave the town that they grew up in. Now it's like we're in Philadelphia, which is such a wonderful city, and you meet people whether they're from New York, they're from Pittsburgh, they're from Texas. It's just from all over the place, and they might come here and then they might go somewhere else, for a season. So,
does having kids grow you up?
Yes. Because I remember before I was married, and I felt like I didn't have time. I then got married, and then I felt like I had even less time. Because now it's not just, I'm free this evening, I can do whatever I want. It's now, we need to work through this together. Where am I going to be? Where are you going to be? How are we making sure we're getting connection and share time together? But then when you get kids, the wonderful thing about kids is they stretch you in different ways. I remember sitting there at one point and looking at my wife and being like, I was a patient person before I had kids. And part of it is just realizing actually it's just showing something that's been inside me this whole time that I've been able to mask in different contexts with adults. But just having kids does age you because now you're starting to just give in greater ways. When they're young, they're waking you up in the middle of the night. They're dictating your sleep schedule. And the older they get, now you're carpooling them. Now you're working your schedule around when their sporting activities are happening and when their games are and their activities. And so I think it does.
What about our culture, the interconnectivity, the freedom, the way that we can just move laterally from any career or work remote and travel around the world? What is that whole life that's kind of sold to us and this disconnect where people aren't having kids as much because they're sacrificing that? Tell me your thoughts to that.
Yeah, I think one of the trade-offs is it can easily, and not for everyone and not every time, but it can easily become very self-focused. And when you have kids, it's supposed to, and it naturally does force you to have to be externally focused. I need to, if my wife's not home, make dinner for them. I may not feel like making dinner, but I need to make dinner for them, right? And that's an obligation now. So it adds all these different obligations where when you're able to just travel freely around, I think what can happen is it becomes very much about your experiences and about what you're able to take in. And it's easier to not be as focused on how you can give. And I think that's one of the tension points that creates. Now, people can be really intentional and that not be the case, but I think that's the natural drift towards that. And part of it is when we aren't rooted in a place, we don't always have to suffer all of the seasons. So when a tree is planted in a space, it gets to experience the beauty of spring. And you get the spring showers, the birds chirping, and it feels like life is coming here again. And then there's the harshness of the summer. The sun is beating down. And then there's the fall and the beautifulness of, they don't get to enjoy the pumpkin spice lattes, but you have all of the fun things that come with fall. And then there's winter, and it's cold, and it's dark, and you have the blues. And so being able to just travel constantly can mean that you aren't being weathered by all those things. And so you're actually moving into spaces that are more comfortable constantly and not always having to grow the thicker bark, the deeper roots to be able to withstand some of the different challenges that this broken world brings us.
Does starting a family grow thick bark?
I think often it does. I think, again, everything's an opportunity. And so if you are really giving of yourself to better others, considering others' interest ahead of your own, and now you've got not only, you've got a wife and now you have kids, there's all these different places that you're having to sacrifice. And so there is a deepening and a strengthening that comes from you walk in the door after a long day of work, and instead of you just being able to go through your own veg process, you actually have to make the decision as you walk up to that door, am I going to be focused on my needs and myself, or am I going to walk in with a heart and a spirit to actually give to others when I walk through this door? I might be tired. I might have had a really hard day. When I walk through that door, am I bringing that in the door, or am I leaving that outside the door? And so it creates different tension points that I think rightly utilized forces one to grow thicker bark, grow deeper roots, and be able to continue to think outside of just themselves.
Is a person who, by their own choice or the external factors, is kind of pressed into this giving lifestyle, is that a person that you think generally has more joy in their life than somebody who kind of does get to focus on their own veg process all the time and is a little bit more self-fulfilling, distraction-oriented lifestyle that sounds more free?
I think it can depend. I think there are plenty of people who don't have kids, for example. Kids aren't a prerequisite for that, I don't think, but choose to give in whatever communities or spaces they're in ways that are focused on others and are sacrificial, that allows them to receive the joy of giving. When you have a family, there's a piece of it that's like a built-in tension point. Some people are not good parents. And so it doesn't always mean that being a parent means that you receive the joy of giving, because there's a sacrifice attached to that. And we all have to make that sacrifice each day to give to someone else besides just ourselves. And there's a joy that comes with that. And obviously we have to work in the balances. If I was only ever doing things and I'm up there doing dishes till 5 o'clock in the morning and doing all these different things for the family and getting no sleep, and then I can't, I go to my job and I do a horrible job at my job, now we're out of balance and I'm going to lose my job. And these days everybody needs their jobs. So, yeah.
Does our culture infantilize adults?
What do you mean by infanticide adults?
Infantilize. Do we treat 23-year-olds like they're 20 years younger than they actually are? Is there a lack of, hey, it's time to settle. It's time to grow some bark.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there's ways that I don't know if it's a society thing I think in general as a society, we have moved towards ease in ways that then affects in significant ways people who are coming up. And so I think even the invention of the smartphone, for example, where the culture has shifted such to, it's called an iPhone. Just soak that in for a minute. An iPhone, and what do you do on it? You do things for yourself, right? And I can now create my own iWorld where I have my apps that I interface that then Those apps now we reach out of the digital world into my physical world to communicate with notifications and expectations. And so in some ways, I don't know if it's that people are being treated as infants. I wonder if it's part of it that we're just so distracted as a society. It's hard for especially people who are growing up with that as their starting point. So for me, I'm a little bit older, still young, but a little bit older. Facebook was coming out when I was in college. There's a whole generation of people who are growing up, and they're post-Facebook, and now it's like TikTok, and they have TikTok on a device as a 6-year-old, which is literally rewiring the chemicals in their brain as they get the dopamine hits of these short swipes. And now their attention span is getting radically reduced. Their ability to be able to pay attention in school, to have a long-form conversation or thought is being stunted. And so in some ways, I think the societal environment that we have is making it harder and harder for people who are coming up who don't have like I grew up I didn't have a smartphone when I was a little kid. And honestly, for us, we're actually trying to limit our kids' access to smartphones and to what they have access to even on phones, because we want them to be able to build real-world relationships, to work through real-world relational problems. When you actually have real-world community, you can't just block somebody. You can't ghost them if you're going to see them at school the next day. And so where it's like, I don't like what you're saying to me right now, so I'm just going to hop out of this friend group and hop into this other friend group, and then real-world relationships actually force you to work through those issues in ways that digital relationships don't. And so we want to encourage our kids to be in context where they have to work through real relational things so that they are mature enough to be able to handle those as they become adults. And I think that's part of the challenge, is as there's a whole generation that's coming up that doesn't know how to deal with interpersonal relationships like you and I would, because they haven't been forced into that singularly. And so now the digital is actually driving the in-person. And so what happens in a thread overnight now might impact how you're interacting with someone during the day. And there's not even a conversation that's happening. It's just, you posted that, or I saw you said this.
Increasingly with the AI technology, I've been talking to a few people about kind of the parasocial relationships that young people, 6 to 12-year-olds say. Like I think like 20 to 30% of people under the age of 12 call ChatGPT one of their friends.
Wow.
And the bot is designed to just reaffirm whatever you say.
Yep.
So there's further lack of that situation where you're forced to, because I grew up without technology everywhere, and if you go to school and you have a fight with a friend, you had to resolve it,
right?
Because you were going to see them every day,
right?
And there weren't that many friends to begin with,
right?
It's like there's only 10 people in your neighborhood that are your age, it's
right?
Like, so
you're out playing outside after school, and something goes down. You have to work through that, or one of your friends will be like, bro, you got to work this out, because we can't do our group activities right now because the two of you guys are beefing.
Yeah, the other community would guilt you into fixing the...
And now it's like, well, why do I need you? Because I have 10,000 other people I can interact with online. I can just change a group. And so that small group complexity and challenges that happen, the weathering that happens in those smaller circles, is now lost because people just change digital circles. And so it's like, oh, that was you had to figure out, bunch of kids, how do you work through this relational tension point that just happened? You threw the football, you thought he was looking, he wasn't looking, it hits him in the back of the head, now he's worked up by it. And you have to figure out, as kids, developmentally, how do we do this? That's lost now. Kids don't play at the park anymore. Kids don't go and spend hours of just free time like hanging out and doing things. It's all like, I'm playing this video game. I'm playing, on this app. I'm on social media. And obviously, like, it even impacts guys and girls differently, and what types of spaces and apps they use to interface, which actually makes it harder for I think as they're getting older, them to actually have healthy guy and girl relationships, because so much of their worlds are now even isolated from each other, especially in the digital context, that working through like these simple little things are stunted. When we turn like comfort and like follow your heart and your feelings as like the penultimate thing, what ends up happening is our feelings are a really bad indicator of what we should do. I don't feel like waking up most mornings and getting out of bed and going through my morning routine on time. If I just listen to that, then I will end up unemployed. And that's a bad outcome. But that would be me listening to my feelings, right? And that's, I think, part of the challenge in today's age is our feelings are, the Bible says the heart is deceitful above all things. Our desires, what we want in life, is often twisted. And we're also not often mature enough to be able to even decipher our own feelings in a moment. And so that's where I think having like outside objective like truth and standards and things that we're striving towards, goals that are not feelings based or oriented, actually help us to move to places of greater maturity. And so a lot of people have heard the message like, hey man, I just need to follow my feelings, and they go to school and then I'm not feeling this career. So maybe they drop out of school, or maybe they get their degree, but they're not feeling it, and they go somewhere else, and they don't have that drive to like accomplish something that's hard, because they don't ever push past the little speed bumps that we run into, right? Like obviously, just even what you're doing with this podcast, there's a lot of work that went into building this. There's a lot of research that went into this. There's a lot of tenacity that went into this. There's times and moments where it's like hard and you question like, should I keep doing this? Do I want to do this? Do I feel like doing this? But what you've been able to grow and develop and do, and the skills and talents that you have now, is because you kept pushing through those. And I think a lot of people don't ever arrive at what their full potential is because they're stunting themselves from growing, because they don't want to go through the push and the pain that's required to actually grow. Like working out, like you're actually straining and stretching and sometimes like making small tears to muscles that then as they regrow, they strengthen. You know, if you look at a football team, they are working hard. They're doing lots of cardio. They're doing lots of running, lots of things that don't feel good, because they have the end goal in mind, which is I want a championship at the end of this season. And so we make a lot of sacrifices along the way for that greater purpose. And I think when we have our greater purpose being inside of ourselves instead of outside of ourselves, it's really hard to know what we're driving towards. And then that actually leads to a lot of, I think, part of the mental health crisis that we have right now is when we look inward, we realize at the end of the day, the deficits that we have. None of us are perfect. We're all broken in different ways. And so when we start leaning on ourselves for our hope and for our deepest like truth and value, it ends up becoming very dark. And so for me, that's where I've got something bigger and brighter that I'm looking to that's outside of myself. I believe that I'm created, and so there's a maker, and that maker has given me a purpose, which is to follow him. Just like, you know, we'd have kings in the old days. It's like I'm under his rule, and yet I don't live life perfectly. So now that's created a problem. And he, in his love for me, sent his son to come and die on a cross for all the wrongs, all the sins, all the rebellion that I have inside of me. And so when I believe in Jesus and believe that he's taking all of that for me, and so I say, I want to follow you now. I've got a bigger purpose than anything that can be found inside of me, because I'm told that I'm loved by someone that's greater than me. I'm told that I have a purpose that's bigger than me, and I'm given a clear direction, which is not to follow myself, but to follow the one who knows better than me. And so for me, that kind of orients everything and gives me not only something to drive towards and a person to strive for, but it gives me a purpose that's outside of myself.
I read this great book a couple of years back called The Motivation Myth. So a lot of times people say it's like, oh, I want to go to the gym or I want to start this business, but I just don't have the motivation yet.
Yeah.
I need to go out and search
For the
motivation.
Yeah.
And then I will do the work and then I will get the result. And the book argues it's like the order, the sequence of things of those is wrong. Do the work. Feel the joy of the results of the work. That joy is the motivation for doing more work. But I think it leaves out a little bit of that part, which is like that doing the work should come from a place of purpose.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in the crisis you're referring to, I think, is there's a lot of that darkness in the heart is there for a reason. Like there's a lack of purpose, and the alarm bells will go off if you're left to your own device. If you're left to just sit in a room by yourself and look at your own heart, you will realize there's something wrong and something needs to change.
Yeah.
But if you distract yourself, that feeling goes away. You can distract yourself for a time. You can distract the darkness away, and then it accrues interest. And then eventually you are faced with it. And there is a certain age when you hit, and it all comes at you at one time. And you realize that there's a very striking lack of purpose in your heart.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's happening for a lot of people. And that's where it's just this kind of seeking. And so maybe if I travel more, maybe if I get a job that doesn't tie me down, that's not a 9 to 5. Maybe if I, try all these different foods. And so now I become a foodie and like trying to find what is going to be that source of fulfillment. Because we're all made innately inside of us. I think it's embedded in our DNA to look for fulfillment. And so part of the question becomes, where are we trying to find that fulfillment? And if we're finding it outside of, I think, where God's designed it, it kind of feels like we're chasing the wind. And so we keep moving and we exert energy, and it actually becomes a cycle, because as we exert more energy trying to find that fulfillment in a place that it isn't to be found, it actually becomes more depressing. And so then it's like, why should I get out of the couch? Why shouldn't I just sit here with my feelings? Why shouldn't I eat my feelings away? Why shouldn't I numb myself by just being so busy that I can't even be in touch with my feelings because there's no space for them? And so I think there's a lot of different ways that we can try to distract from, the alarm bells that are actually going off inside of us.
Is there value in forcing oneself to kind of sit and maybe somebody isn't there to like pursue a faith yet, but to sit there like in a meditative state and say, no, like get rid of all the distractions, like lock yourself in a room for like 10 hours or whatever. Find a way to eliminate the distractions.
I think you're really onto something there, Chris. I think one of the things about our day and age, I was just seeing an article about this and it really struck me. It was talking about how we actually feel bad when there's silence. And it was actually talking about it from two different standpoints. One is like we internally, with all of the dopamine that we're able to get, these little short bursts of dopamine through all the technology we have access to right now, being unplugged feels uncomfortable. And then on top of that, the other piece of it is we feel like we're being unproductive. If we were to sit alone with our thoughts, society would say, well, like, you're not doing anything. And so we've actually lost that art of like self-reflection. We've lost that art of meditating. We've lost that art of actually being alone with our own thoughts and actually hearing them and listening to them. And so it can be so busy and so loud that we don't actually know how we're actually doing, because we don't actually slow down enough and silence things enough to create the space to be able to hear our own thoughts and our own what is going on inside of me. And so sometimes friends can be helpful with that too, like just sitting and like asking questions and helping us to like self-reflect, because it's hard for us to do that because it's a muscle that's very weak, just societally. You know, even for me, it's like just go, 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 do. Like I've got boxes, I've got things that need to happen, but it's like, when's the last time you just sat down for 2 hours and you're like, I'm going to do nothing? And then wait for it. Think about that for a moment. I'm going to sit for 2 hours and do nothing. Maybe me, a pen, and a pad. Isn't there a bit of like terror that almost creeps in? Like, wait a second, hold on. I ain't signed up to be like that alone with myself. I don't really want to hear like my thoughts that loudly. And I think it's something that we're all missing.
In my 20s, it's so funny you say this, because in my 20s, I can recall a few like watershed moments where in my mind I came to a realization, or I made a very significant decision, whether it was with my business or my life or something. And there are a couple of times where I'm like, yeah, there was a significant moment there. And they're all when I was traveling. And I say, oh, I guess like traveling is educational because it's like an explorative experience of going out there. And upon reflection, and looking at my notes.
Hold on, did you say reflection?
Well, upon
reflecting, so you're thinking of your own. You're thinking about your thoughts.
Upon my reflection of my reflection of my thoughts, I realized it wasn't the traveling, it was the airport. Because the airplane, because my dad trained us, you could show up at the airport like 3 hours earlier before your flight.
Right.
And you sit there and there's nothing to do. And you get onto the plane, and I'm too cheap to buy the Wi-Fi, so there's nothing to do on the plane. So you're just with your thoughts for 4 or 5 hours.
Wow.
I can think of so many significant changes or distinctions or realizations I had because of the just that experience.
What an epiphany. I mean, for me, the space where I feel that is at the beach. I love going to, as we say here in Philly, the shore. And to me, it's the one space where like time slows down, where things get quiet. My kids are old enough now that like often they're just kind of like doing their own thing, and I can just sit there, and I'm not, it's, if you're at the beach and you're on the phone the whole time, you're like really doing something wrong. But 2 is like, it's also really bright and sunny. So like, unless you want to kill your battery in about a half an hour, like your phone's not going to be, and I don't have one of the new iPhones that has like 2 days battery life. So it'll drain pretty quickly. But just being able to sit there and just being able to think about life. As you hear the seagulls overhead and the crashing of the waves, and you feel the warmth of the sun beating down on you, you're in creation. It's beautiful. It's tranquil. And then you can just like reflect. And I think what you just said, I think if people stopped and reflected more instead of filling space more, they would actually find out more about themselves, and that would actually enable them to become a healthier version of themselves.
What does leaving a legacy mean to you?
Yeah, leaving a legacy, I think, my sister passed away in a car accident when she was 19. And in going through her journals, she had a quote that said, "I wasn't just saved, I was sent." And so she believed in God, and she believed she was saved in trusting God, but she also believed that she was sent here to do things for the time she had on earth. And so I only have one tattoo, and that all of us siblings got her death date, but I also got the word sent. And it's just a reminder that we have a purpose here, and part of what I want to do is to leave a legacy. I want to leave a legacy in the people that I've been able to interact with, and the people I've been able to touch. I want to leave a legacy with my kids. I want my kids to know God. I want them to love other people well. I want my neighbors and I want my friends, people who I interact with, whether that's all through our kids' sports or whether that's because they're my next door neighbor. I want them to feel and know that they are valued, that they are loved, that there's somebody who cares about them and sees them. I want them to feel safe, because that's how God wants us to feel, because of his love for us. So I want there to be a legacy that when I leave, that in my wake of my short time here on earth, that there are people who have felt more loved because I've been here. They felt more cared about because I've been here. And they feel like they've seen a glimpse of God's love for them through me, and my love for them. And so it's part of the legacy that I want to leave, where I may not build anything big, but I'm hoping that I touch people, and that people feel the deeper love that their Heavenly Father has for them through just my little acts of faithfulness and my little acts of care for them and towards them, and just being a person who genuinely wants to know and understand them, not the caricature of them, not the person that they walk around with where the mask is covering who they really are, but actually gets to know, who are you? What keeps you up at night? What is going on in your life? And let me come alongside you and love you there, because that's the kind of love that I've received.
That's a mission.
I feel like it's a worthy one. Something worth giving myself to.
Amen. Oh, I feel like we could go on forever, but I know we got to get you out of here. So what's next for you, Joe?
Well, this Saturday we've got, I'm really actually excited about it. At the church that I'm a part of, we've got what we call youth worship nights. And so it's an opportunity for youth across the city to come together and to be able to realize that there's like other youth that they can interact with, other youth who love God, other youth who will love on them, and to be able to play games and laugh. And this particular time I'm actually preaching a sermon on it. It's actually Life is Hard, Where is God? And so being able to talk about where God is in the midst of hardship. And so that's kind of what the rest of this week looks like. It should be a lot of fun. So
where can we find you?
You can find me in person. I'm mostly just an in-person guy. The digital stuff for me, I just realized I get so sucked into it, and that my relational bandwidth is so interpersonal, that when I start giving my energies to people who maybe I haven't seen since college, for example, in a positive or a negative way, like reacting to something they're doing or commenting or something, I just realized that's probably not a place I can have a lot of influence. And I feel like a lot of times we spend so much energy throwing comments across the interwebs that aren't actually influence anyone, but it's just part of this big social, just noise. Such a great word for it, noise. And so I'd rather spend my time with in-flesh people. And I also just realized if I get in there, I'm just going to waste time. You know, every time I go in, it's like an hour later, how's it an hour later? And I don't know if I actually accomplished anything.
You would appreciate. I installed Graphene operating system to my phone, so it's hard coded to be black and white, and all the apps are perma-banned. So I get messaging, Gmail, Maps, and Spotify music. Yeah. But even if I try to install Instagram, it crashes. The whole app store doesn't even
so
work.
Interesting. Yeah, that's such a great tool.
Yeah, and it was funny because the first couple of nights I had it, I found myself just swiping up and down the menu.
Right, just instinctively, the muscle memory.
Screen. I was just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I was feeling, and then finally I was like, you reset after that button.
Yeah, the phantom vibrations when you're walking around my phone. I must be important enough that my phone went off, right? And it's no, just moved in my pocket. So, but yeah, thanks so much, Chris, for having me on. I've really appreciated the opportunity to be able to have this conversation and your hospitality. So thanks for allowing me on the podcast here, Chris.
Thank you so much for coming, Joe.
Yeah.